This is Weights and Wealth, your one-stop shop for entertaining education on building a stronger body and bank account.
We are not doctors or financial advisors and must warn you this is not medical or investing advice. It is for your entertainment.
Welcome back to Weights and Wealth. Sorry for the brief hiatus. Real life has caught up with both of us and
Nick,
particularly Nick. Good news is he just picked up a promotion. So congratulations to Nick. Shows that, all that work in his real job, pays off. Meanwhile, me and Ted are still rowing along as lowly junior officers. So don't expect us to, pick up any promotions anytime soon. Speaking of that, I had a funny anecdote from one of my good friends. Shout out to Mike Welsh. We have another shout out as well. But he was bored at work one day and just fired off a bunch of random applications to other companies. And he works in supply chain. I'm not going to name where he works. But Blue Origin, Jeff Bezos' space company, came back to him and they were like, hey, we would love to have you. You look like an ideal candidate for this job. And we're going to offer you $15,000 a year over what you're making right now, plus X bonus. And so he just was like, sweet, and took it to his boss and was like, hey, Blue Origin is offering me this. I really like you guys. I don't want to move necessarily, but this is a great opportunity. Just wondering what you guys can do to incentivize me to stay here. And, they came back to him like a week later and were like, hey, we'll match it plus the bonus and promote you for you to stay here.
Wow.
So I was thinking about that and, being under the employer that I am, I can't exactly be like, oh, Kim Jong-un called me and said, hey, I'll offer you this job for 50 more grand a year.
Sorry, Uncle Sam.
Yeah. It's not exactly how the public sector works. So just thought that was funny. Talking about promotions and stuff. But that is a cool part of being in the private sector. Just don't be afraid to, fire off applications as long as you don't have, a legal agreement with your employer that prevents you from doing so. Sometimes it can open up doors and opportunities and give you leverage as an employee.
Yeah. The wealth wisdom for this week's show is to listen to Weights and Wealth when they tell you to buy gold and silver, because they're doing very well right now. Gold hit over $2,700 an ounce, and silver was over $34 an ounce?
Yep, $34, $27.16. It's actually an all-time high
for gold. Yeah. So on a more serious note, we don't really push gold and silver. We don't do advertisements like other podcasts. But something that we have said before when we've talked about investing is that it can be a good idea, not investment advice per se, but it can be a good idea to diversify. Mm-hmm. And even if you have most of your money in stocks, like a vast majority of people, if you put 5% into precious metals or Bitcoin or something like that, it's always helpful to diversify. Mm-hmm. I think when we've talked about this before on the podcast, I've been the most in on gold and silver, but that might have been before Sean was with us. So I'm not sure if Sean has.
I don't own any right now, but I wish I did.
Yeah.
So I wish I had more right now. I've been looking into it for a while, and it's one of those things where I'm always like, do I want to do this right now? What am I missing out on? I always feel like I should, and I just never end up pulling the trigger. And, now I'm going to regret it. And the issue is that it's not like economic conditions in the near term are likely going to cause a downturn in kind of these, more inflation hedge type investments. I don't really see, the pace slowing, because I think that the Fed just lowered rates.
Yeah, so something we talked about after I read The Changing World Order by Ray Dalio is that gold and silver aren't necessarily going to match the returns that you're going to get on, say, the stock market, but typically throughout history, when they have spiked because of a change in the world currency, that's when they have this ginormous spike, and then you can capitalize on that. So with BRICS gaining strength, if you think that that's a possibility of the US dollar kind of going away and not being the world's main currency, then it's always a good idea to hedge your bet a little bit and have a little bit of precious metals.
Yeah, it never hurts. As long as, and it's probably, I mean, it's easy to get exposure to it by buying miners and stuff like that. I've done that myself with nuclear energy, just with all the tech companies coming out and saying that with AI and with the amount of data processing plants that they're going with, nuclear power is the only way that they'll be able to have enough electricity generated to actually power these plants. So I went in and I tried to find as many like US-based uranium companies, and I bought a uranium ETF. They're doing pretty well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the thing with commodities. It's a little easier to kind of news trade in a way where you're just looking at like, hey, what is the market and what is the, economy actually going towards? And rather than trying to pick a winner out of, hundreds of companies that could be exposed to this industry, you can kind of just be like, okay, well, I'm going to go straight to the source. It's pretty simple, like if we're going to be using a lot more uranium because we're building, giant data plants that are powered by nuclear power plants, well, then you just go to mining companies.
Yeah.
It's pretty, it's a little less complex. So for, a knuckle dragger like me, it's a little easier to pick up on trends. But again, none of this is necessarily investment advice. Just, don't be afraid of the stock market. You're not going to lose all your money overnight unless you're doing totally reckless things, and never invest more than you can afford to lose. So always pay your bills first, keep a roof over your head, get food on the table, and then if you have money left over, invest that.
Or invest that first at the beginning of the month, like we've talked about.
But you still got to be able to pay your mortgage.
Moving on, we've got an interesting article that Sean found. You want to hit that?
Yeah. So the Washington Examiner, obviously it's election season, a lot of stuff going on, and the Washington Examiner pulled Rasmussen poll and cited this survival / prepper community called Fortitude Ranch, which has they have this app called what's it called? It's called Collapse Survivor, and basically you become a member in their community and you can download this app, and they have multiple locations throughout the U.S. where let's say the apocalypse happens, you have a safe place to go that's staffed, it's ready to go, it's got infrastructure built in, it's off the grid. And they sent out a note to all their members, I guess, saying that due to news and historical trends, they cite a higher likelihood of post-election protest violence. So they're opening their locations nearby high-risk areas. They don't necessarily define what those are, but you could probably assume that would be most major cities. They say that election results are likely to be contested, and there could be weeks of protests and post-election violence. There is no way to predict how violent or widespread this could become, but it could quickly develop and get out of control. If police are tied up with public protests, gang members and criminals know this is an ideal time for them to loot. If the post-election violence is bad and looting takes off, there's a chance that it could escalate into home invasions and marauding. So then the article goes on to talk about how after President Trump was inaugurated, protesters damaged and broke parts of Washington, D.C. In kind of like show of force and anger after his inauguration. And then we had, of course, January 6th, where a lot of Trump supporters entered the U.S. Capitol and installed the counting of President Joe Biden's inaugural, his electoral college victory. And so this Rasmussen Reports survey confirmed that many likely voters see a similar situation in this election. And Rasmussen says that of these likely voters, 43% believe that a civil war is likely, while 45% don't. The rest aren't sure. So then I also have another article here from 12 News. Looks like an NBC affiliate. And Maricopa County, I think most of us probably remember Maricopa from 2020. And the election officials are saying that they expect to take 10 to 13 days to tabulate the ballots in this general election. And more than 400,000 people have cast their vote out of an estimated voter turnout in Maricopa County of 2.1 million. So they have around 25% in, and they think that they're going to need roughly, at the most, 2 weeks after Election Day to actually finish counting.
I can't believe we haven't fixed some of the issues from 4 years ago, and it's still taking place this long to count votes.
Well, it's
you would have thought we would have fixed some of the issues. You would have thought
if, left or right, wherever you are, that, the amount of like election denialism, wherever it's coming from, like you would think that the first thing we want to do is kind of like alleviate public concerns about this stuff. And I mean, Taiwan has like 10 times the amount of people as Maricopa, and I think they just had an election and they counted them all in 6 hours by hand. They didn't do it electronically. They didn't do anything. So like, yeah, Taiwan's a first world country. It's a pretty solid place, but why can't a state of the largest and greatest country on earth count 1/5 the amount of votes in that amount of time? Why can't we know who won on election day?
Yeah, it's kind of crazy.
And that's the thing is like it's the same county as last time. So like if you remember Trump, his like contesting of the election and stuff like that, there was all this stuff going on with Maricopa, and I don't know, I just feel like it's really it's disheartening in a way because you just see these problems coming. It's like there's a large freight train on this track, and they've done nothing to divert it. They've done nothing to slow it down, and they've probably just added coal to the engine, and now it's going faster and faster.
It seems intentional that they were just like, all right,
they had 4 years.
Let this train hit. Like,
they had 4 years to figure this out. 4 years to figure this out.
When Sean brought up the article about Fortitude Ranch and how this conversation started, I immediately thought, this sounds like a good marketing and publicity grab from Fortitude Ranch. So I went on their website. Thinking, even if there's some uproar over the election results, I don't think it's going to wind up in the grid getting taken down and having a full-on apocalypse. So it sounds just like a good marketing ploy by this company, and I decided to check out their prices. So we'll go through a couple different, I guess like the lowest price plan.
Membership tiers.
Yeah, they have different tiers. And it varies also by how many years you sign up for, how many people you're signing up for. So, for example, if you're an individual and you want to sign up for Fortitude Ranch protection for 50 years for just a shared space and a private locker, that's going to cost you $5,200 down, and annual fees are going to be
$300.
Yeah, $300
with a quarterly payment of $125.
Yeah, and then if you're looking at something a little pricier, say you're a family of 5 and you want a private room with a private toilet and a sink, for a 50-year membership, you're looking at, is that $41,000 down?
$41,100 with a quarterly payment of $1,375 and an annual fee of $1,500.
Yeah, so pretty penny there.
That's like the most expensive.
So I don't know. When Sean brought up this article, I was just thinking, this doesn't really sound like it's that likely to happen. And in their statement, they're not saying they think it's likely to happen. And it just seems like they're trying to get their name out there for some publicity.
I mean, they definitely are doing that. I mean, that's the whole reason that business exists.
Yeah.
And you got to think about it. It's like there wouldn't be a market for this if there wasn't a history of violence around these elections. I mean, it's gotten more and more chaotic every single year. I mean, the Examiner article wasn't lying when, we had Antifa types in DC in 2016 or 2017 technically, and then we had January 6th in 2021.
Yeah.
And so it's just gotten more and more intense.
I guess I would say
over the past 10 years.
I guess I would say with election day, if there is a lot of uncertainty and there's a possibility of violence, I would just treat it like New Year's Eve. You know, like growing up in my family, we were always told, don't be on the roads on New Year's Eve because there's going to be drunk drivers. You know, there's going to be more drunk drivers than normal. So just stay in the house on New Year's Eve. Don't be out on the roads where there's that potential for something bad to happen. So I would just say probably follow the same thing with election day. If you think there's a chance of violence, stay home and don't be out like on election night.
Yeah, you probably, yeah.
You think that's a bad recommendation?
I think you should probably have more stuff in place than just staying home. You should like I have like 5 different ways to filter water and plenty of other preparations made just because that's who I am. I'm not saying that everybody has to do that. And
if you run out of water filtration options, you can always drink your own pee and just keep recycling it, right?
That's not true.
Is that your 5th option?
That's not. No. And I do not recommend that to anyone. I know you got to wannabe Bear Grylls here. That's pretty gross. But yeah, so I mean, in summary, there are a lot of like, I guess, doom and gloom type news coming out. So, I would take everything with a grain of salt. Do things that would prepare you for pretty much anything. I mean, look at what happened in North Carolina. So it never hurts to be, prepared in a way. You don't have to be like a total Boy Scout about it, but, you should have some food and some non-perishables on hand. And, if you're comfortable around guns, you should probably have one.
Speaking of preparing
stuff
yourself,
like that.
Speaking of preparing yourself for anything, it's a good idea to
also be in shape.
Expand your brain.
Well, yeah, you could also read plenty of different books on these subjects as well. Like I have a book on Native American apothecary, like medicines, like plant medicine and stuff. Just because I do nothing about that subject. I think I've talked about this before, but
I think 3 or 4 times on the pod so far.
It's interesting, yeah. But we thought that it would be fun just for this short episode to kind of go over like our top 5 books that we've read.
Yes.
And this is no particular genre. It's not like this is all fitness books. This is all finance books, and we're gonna talk a little bit about each one as we go through. So Ted, if you want to lead us off.
Yeah, I guess we'll
go
say
back and forth.
The name of the book and the author, a 1 or 2 sentence summary, maybe something we really enjoyed from it. But we'll run through this list kind of
conversation.
Yeah. We'll get through it quickly, but not too quickly. So my number 1 book I put down, when people ask me what my favorite book is, this is usually the book I say, just because I always want to go back and reread it. I haven't reread it, but I always am like, when I'm looking for a new book, I'm like, I should go back and reread that book because I love it so much. So that's 1776 by David McCullough. And he basically goes through the war campaign in the Revolutionary War with George Washington's army through the entire year of 1776. And he includes a bunch of letters that were written by different generals and soldiers at that time. And it's just a really, really great book that tells you a lot about the Revolutionary War in American history, early American history. So that's my number 1. Sean,
what is the most interesting thing, or what is like the one thing that you learned from that book that you would say you'd never picked up in school?
I don't know, because I read it so long ago.
Surprising to you.
Yeah, I think I read this book in high school.
So what makes you want to reread it again then?
Because
what was so striking about it?
I just really enjoyed it. Usually when I talk about my favorite books, it's about like things I learned from it. But with 1776, I'm not sure if there's
was it the story? Like, was it his way of writing?
His way of writing and of stringing storytelling together, where he's actually just giving you history. Mm-hmm. I know that Sean and I have both read John Adams by the same author, David McCullough.
That was a very good book as well.
He's just really good at telling the story of history. He's like telling nonfiction. He's writing nonfiction, but it almost seems like a fiction way of writing. Would you agree with that with John Adams? Just how it kind of blends the story together?
Like it's all very like factual and based off of, like letters that they wrote to each other. It's it's all documented evidence. He's not surmising anything.
Yeah, every other page has a like part of a letter in it.
But it's all very well documented. And he's like, but he just kind of puts it into, I guess, everyman terms, or like something that's more digestible in a way.
It's just weaved together like a story. It's not like a lot of nonfiction books where it's just like kind of listing things. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Sean, you want to go with one of yours?
Yeah. So it's hard to define an exact number one, but I would say of the books I've read in the past 5 years, this is probably the most amazing book I have read. And it's The Napoleon of Notting Hill by G.K. Chesterton. I was reading it. It's a short book. It's I think it's only 150 to 200 pages. But I finished it in an airport, and I actually started crying. It was so good. Like I've never been more inspired by a book than this one. And
what's it about?
So it's about it's a dystopian future in a way. It's London. The year's like 2100 or something. And the English have done away with any type of elected like government, or even the monarchy. Now the monarchy is determined by a lottery system. So basically when the king dies, they just pull a random social security number out of a hat, and that guy's king until he dies. Because they, in their infinite wisdom as human beings, because, we have reached the pinnacle of perfection that humanity is, it doesn't make a difference who you are, and you are fully worthy and should be trusted with absolute power, because we're all equal and we're all the same and we're all good. And it introduces this character who is somewhat, he's like the only guy in England that has like a sense of humor in a way, and is just this, irony-ridden, total goofball of an individual, and has all these wild, outlandish ideas, and is not really respected by a lot of his friends who think of themselves as very proper English gentlemen. And it's funny, the scene where he finds out he's king, he's standing on his head, like just in public, just making a funny face at his friend, and the police come up to him and are like, "Hey, you're the king now." And so it fast forwards about a decade or so, and he's the king now, and he's gotten bored with how proper everything is, and so he decrees that every single neighborhood in London has to revert back to its like 15th century roots, and they all have to go by their old titles of nobility, and they all have to dress like medieval nobles, and every single mayor has to have a town guard that carries real weapons, and they have to build walls around each of their suburbs. So like imagine that, like, let's say you grew up outside Chicago, and every single town outside Chicago had to build a town wall and have a town guard, and everybody was wearing the big like flowing like fur robes.
Was walking around with a sword back in fashion?
Yes, you were required to be armed. So it was like a full reversion, and then of course everybody was very like upset about it, and they were like, but they can't say no because he's the king, and he has absolute power. And so everybody just kind of grudgingly goes along with it until about another 10 years later, and there's one guy who took it very, very seriously, and he was he became the Lord Mayor of this very tiny town. And there's I don't want to spoil the story, but basically a huge war erupts, and there's this huge conflict, and they're like basically it goes back to like the War of the Roses pretty much in England, and it's this hilarious but inspiring story about these guys who like really see the beauty and like the adventure and everything, and because they refuse to let the modern world, when the way everything is so bubble wrapped and so just like taken for granted. Like the idea that you can walk into the Wegmans today and go pick up mangoes and bananas is absolutely bonkers. Like in all of human history, in the 10, 20,000 years of documented human history, this has never been a thing.
Yeah.
And we were just like, oh yeah, like I threw out a bunch of bananas because they had some bruises on it. You know, like that would have like a king in the 13th century would have like conquered an entire nation just to get a bunch of bananas.
Yeah, I think on average, the like each piece of produce that you get at the supermarket is from like 1,100 miles away or something.
Yeah, it's
absolutely insane.
And if you look at the supply chains, oftentimes they go from that place to another, you know, East Asian country to be packaged and then shipped back again. And so they travel multiple thousands of miles to get to where you are very efficiently and very quickly because they do spoil. So there's just a lot of like really good monologues in there and just, you know, kind of inspiring and like insightful stories that kind of really, really make you take a step back and think about how lucky you are and how much you take things for granted and how you should be trying to find that adventure in your own life.
My next book, I wrote down The Compound Effect by Darren Hardy, but I'm making a quick hot swap here.
Sorry, Darren.
So,
not good enough.
Yeah, sorry. But I'm going to do Free to Choose by Milton Friedman. It was probably the first economics book that I read. And Sean, did I give that one to you or you already read it?
No.
You don't? Okay. But Free to Choose, I think there's a video series on YouTube, and I think he made the video series first and then turned it into a book, but that could be the other way around. So if you're not a huge reader and you'd rather just watch a YouTube video, you can find the Free to Choose series on YouTube. But he goes through and just really breaks down into easy, common sense terms a bunch of different things, whether it's income tax or like rent price control or tariffs. He just goes into all these different topics and breaks down how the economic policy affects the individual person and the economy. And it's a super easy read, even if you have no background in economics. So Free to Choose, great book.
Yeah, I felt the same way about Sowell's Advanced Economics and Basic Economics.
Yeah, Basic Economics is very good as well. To be
honest,
I would say
easy reads.
Free to Choose, I preferred
better
more.
Prep.
I liked Free to Choose better than Thomas Sowell's Basic Economics.
Yeah, but both of those are solid reads.
Yeah.
My second one is also economically oriented, but it is, in a way, a kind of action fiction about it's called Crashmaker, a federal affair, and it's by Victor Sperando. It's basically about this Wall Street trader who has a kind of adversarial relationship with the chairman of the Fed of New York, and who eventually becomes the governor, like the president of the Fed. And this, throughout the whole series, they're two books. They're both about 1,500 pages, so it's thick, but it is filled with just incredible economic arguments, in favor of it's kind of the Austrian school. Currency arguments, mainly talking about gold standard type stuff, constitutional arguments, very interesting interpretations of different powers of the government, what they should have, what they shouldn't have. And it's basically this Wall Street trader ends up crashing the entire economy, enriching himself, funding an election campaign, and then getting elected president and abolishing the Fed. It's this.
That's like your dream right there.
It's this wild book. It's super cool. It's super cool because it's got everything from international relations to assassinations to, economists and trading and lawyers and Supreme Court cases and political drama. And it is everything that you can imagine it to be. So I would highly recommend picking up the Crashmaker book. Literally, if you Google that, it'll come up.
Okay.
Super, super good.
Next, the third one on Sean's list could have been on my list, but it's not. So the third one I put on here was Where Men Win Glory by John Krakauer. Reason I put it on this list, as Sean mentioned when we were making this list right before the episode, is probably because I just read it. But
recency bias.
Yeah. It was the first fiction book I've read. No, sorry, not fiction. It was the first military book I've read in a long time. Probably in the last year, I guess, or a year and a half. But it's about Pat Tillman and his death from fratricide and the cover-up that those in the U.S. Army and the U.S. government went to, the lengths they went to cover it up. So John Krakauer is an amazing author. I really enjoy his books. And Where Men Win Glory is a really great story that I don't think many people know. A lot of people do know who Pat Tillman is. He was...
he's posted every single year.
He was a football player. He was on the Arizona Cardinals, and he left his NFL contract to enlist in the Army after 9/11. So he's pretty famous, and a lot of people do know who he is. But a lot of people don't know about the fratricide that occurred and how the government covered it up. I knew about the fratricide, but I didn't know exactly what happened with the cover-up, and it's pretty shocking. And when I was reading it, I saw a name in there of a I don't want to say exactly who it is, but I saw a name in there of an officer, and I was like, wait, I think that could be the same officer that is now a much higher rank. And sure enough, it was. And I was talking to a guy in the Army that I'm with that is very familiar with the story and has read the book, and he was like, "Yeah, that's sometimes they rise up."
That's tough.
So, really, really great book. If your emotions are affected when you read, this one will probably make you cry. It's a really, really good book. Really well written. So.
Very interesting. Yeah. No, that's we could go down a whole rabbit hole with that. I think we should do a quote unquote conspiracy theory episode of not actual conspiracy theories, things that are real that are most people assume are fake.
Yeah.
Or be like, oh, that would never happen, or that you're full of it. I think we should do something like that. Kind of like this. Comment below on the YouTube video if you guys would like to see that. We kind of pick our top 5 conspiracy theories, quote unquote, and then we just go through the troves and troves of evidence that these are not conspiracy theories.
That'd be a good one. If you want us to do that one, let us know, and then also comment or DM us on Instagram your favorite conspiracy theory, and we'll cover that one too.
We would love to do like serious, in-depth research on this stuff and then present it to you all. And no matter how outlandish it is, I'll give it a try. I'm always willing to take it on, So my third book is The Other Greeks by Victor Davis Hanson. Unbelievable book about the origins of Western civilization, how really the people always credit, Plato and Aristotle and the Greek philosophers with building what we now enjoy, the great Western civilization that has spread throughout the world and has dominated the world for pretty much the entire modern era, and has given so much freedom and so much wonderful things to the world. Advancement in technology and science, in everything. And what Hanson argues is that it wasn't actually the philosophers, that the polis originated as a meeting place for the farmers. And it was these individual kind of yeoman, independent landowners who tilled the land and worked the land that gave rise to Western civilization, because it was these farmers who had come together at the place that became Athens, and that's where they would meet. Before the Athenians were Athenians, it was just a bunch of farmers in that area who were neighbors. And then they all started kind of coming to this one place because it was probably easily defendable in the time of need, but it was also probably convenient. It was some central place where everybody could meet, and it was probably I already said easily defendable, but there's a multitude of reasons why they went to this one place. And then, eventually people start to take up residence there and cater to these larger annual meetings where people are discussing, like markets and stuff like that. And like he goes through a multitude of reasons, like even down to the style of warfare that the ancient Greeks fought with. It was inherently defensive.
Yeah. And it was because of the systems of all the equal farmers.
Yes. There was no top down, we are going to war. It was no, everybody, had a voice. Every single citizen was like, hey, I think we should, I think we shouldn't. But it was literally the pure weight of the armor prevented the Greeks really, until Alexander. But the phalanx in Alexander's day was very different than this early phalanx.
Yeah. And this was a really interesting book, I thought, because when you learn about the Greeks in school, all you learn about is like the warriors and like the warfare of these Greek city-states and the philosophers. But the other Greeks, the farmers, Victor Davis Hanson who's a farmer himself, makes a really good argument for like, these were the Greeks that gave us Western democracy. So yeah, really good book. I wouldn't say it's one of my favorite books I've ever read, but I would definitely say it was a good book.
I thought it was, I think one of the reasons I liked it so much, because it was such dry material, things like he had chapters and chapters on irrigation techniques. Yeah. And, just this stuff that you would think would be horribly boring to read, but he was able to present it in such a way that you kind of, you feel like that guy in Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where all the red strings everywhere, connecting all the dots, and full Charlie moment.
Charlie Day.
Yeah. But that's kind of what he was doing in there, but in a more coherent fashion, where he was like, okay, well, this obviously would influence that because, they're primarily olive farmers and grape farmers. So therefore, this is the type of, farm economy that they would have had. And then this would make sense, so it was a great read. And I was just profoundly impressed by the way he was able to write it. And I think
you'll learn new words like democracy that will change your political opinions. So.
Oh yeah.
All right, my next book, The Real Anthony Fauci, RFK. I was just talking about this book at work yesterday with some people that maybe didn't have the same opinions as myself, but I urged them to read it, and it was just a quick discussion, and I was more or less saying the things that people in power have done will surprise you, and the things that these systems that we have in place, these different industries, the things that they will do for money are pretty shocking. And The Real Anthony Fauci exposes that better than any book I've ever read. So I would say definitely worth a read. The conversation at work the other day started because someone brought the book up and said, I couldn't even finish this book because of how appalling it was. And so then that's how the conversation appeared.
Interesting.
And I was like, well, you should keep reading it because it keeps getting worse. But it's definitely a hard one to get through. A lot of our listeners also listen to the almost as famous Joe Rogan.
Yeah,
and I know, potential future guest.
Yes, potential future guest Joe Rogan.
And I know that he has said on his podcast before that when he was listening to the audiobook, he would try to listen to it in the sauna and had to stop after 5 or 10 minutes every time he would be listening to it because it was just so disheartening and so appalling, a lot of the things in the book. So definitely, I would say worth a read. It is long, but I got through it pretty quickly because of how gripping it was. So yeah. Okay. Sean?
Yeah. So speaking of books that will make you depressed, Always with Honor by Pyotr Wrangel. Unbelievable book about the Russian Revolution, and it's written from it was written by pretty much the chief of staff of the Tsarist armies, so the Russians who were resisting the communists. Yeah, and so it's just basically this general's story from when the World War I was going on. The Tsar abdicates. This general, I think he was a lieutenant colonel at the time, he resigns his commission because he doesn't want to be involved anymore. He sees that these Bolsheviks and communists have, taken over the government. The provisional government's weak. It's not doing anything. So he's like, I'm just going to go into the privacy of my estate and hopefully be left alone. So he tries to be left alone.
Hopefully.
But the thing about communists is that they will never leave you alone, and which is why it is imperative that you resist Bolshevism and communism at all times. There is no NIMBY. There is no just leave me alone. Never happens. And so Mr. Wrangel miraculously escapes being executed by the Bolsheviks. They actually had him under armed escort, and I don't remember the exact details of it, but he was able to flee with his wife and family and rescue them. And he moves all the way to the Caucasus, takes up command, and wins a series of stunning victories, and eventually works his way up to taking supreme command of all the Cossack and Tsarist loyalist forces. And at a certain point, he was going to win. But at the critical moments, the British Crown and the Americans pulled the rug from under him and cut off all support and armaments and blockaded them. And
not the only time they've done that.
Yes. So this is it was very disheartening, but an incredibly inspiring story. Super duper cool. Just like war stories. I've always found the interwar period and World War I to be the most fascinating period of warfare to discover or to study, because you had the airplane, you had machine guns, you had armor, but you also had cavalry still. You still had horsemen with swords.
It's like a blend of two time periods.
It's this unbelievable combination of incredible things, and just the ways that they were able to, actually use sabers and cavalry against, semi-modern armies and win. Like this guy was very impressive. He started out as an engineer officer and then became a cavalry, field grade. So he's a very impressive man. He survived the war, I want to say, and, published his book after, and it was out of print for a long time. I believe that was Mystery Grove Publishing. They got it back in. They're kind of a small time publisher on the internet and stuff. But unbelievable book. Highly, highly recommend it. It's like when people ask me for books to read, I have 2 copies of it because I always give it to someone. It's an awesome book. I gave one to a buddy in Bullock. He's from Azerbaijan. He liked it because it has General Wrangel on it with his big Cossack hat. Yeah. And so he's like, oh, I know what that is.
I think I've given the compound effect to at least 10 or 15 people. I think I gave you a copy. Yeah, yes. I did. Yeah. That was probably 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
But speaking of Bolshevik and Russian history, an honorable mention that Sean and I both had that did not make our top 5 is The Gulag Archipelago by Alexander Solzhenitsyn. And back to what we were talking about earlier with learning things in books that you didn't learn in school. I think during AP Euro Russian world history kind of sections of history class, this was just skipped over entirely for I don't know what reason. But Gulag Archipelago is about essentially the Bolsheviks sending people to the gulags, and Alexander Solzhenitsyn was sent to the Gulag and survived. And he survived?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, he wouldn't have been.
Yeah. But I think the first copies of it were circulating during the time when he was in jail.
Yeah. I'm trying to find this particular quote, but the most striking one from it, essentially, I'm paraphrasing, but it basically goes that if they had simply resisted in the slightest, if they had made the NVD think twice about coming to their home and snatching them in the middle of the night, how many lives would have been saved?
Yeah, and how
many people would have not been sent to the Gulag and died of starvation or been shot or simply been executed?
Yeah. It's a crazy story to read because the way that he starts walking through the beginning of it is so much like the very famous quote from the Holocaust, where it's like, first they came for these people and I didn't do anything because I wasn't that. And then they came for these people and I still didn't do anything because I wasn't that.
Yeah.
And then they came for me. Like it basically walks through how the Bolsheviks just rounded everyone up and the crazy things they rounded people up for. It was like, if you just read the book, it's you cannot believe that it actually happened the way it happened. So really great book and a period of history that I think more people did not learn about in history class.
You need to study Russian history. Like if you are not, you are severely behind the curve. Like some would say, not going to make it. But I'll give you the benefit of the doubt, and read these books. Look at other nations, look at history, and understand where we are and what is happening now. For my final book recommendation is Why Liberalism Failed by Patrick Deneen. He was one of my professors at Notre Dame. Fantastic book that I think summarizes what a lot of disaffected politically minded people such as myself, because I do not feel that I'm represented by any like currently established political party. Libertarians, no. Republicans, no. Democrats, no. Socialists, no.
Bolsheviks?
No. And I don't want to call myself an independent because I don't like being a fence sitter. Like I have very strong beliefs, but
they're just too strong.
They're just. I don't believe in compromise. I'm sorry. No. But basically, he kind of points out that the situation where we are today is the inevitable result of small L liberalism, not liberal as in like, my aunt who votes for Kamala Harris and Joe Biden, not that kind of liberal.
Not liberal like Democrat.
Yeah, but liberal as in like the very founding ideas of America, like Rousseau and every other Enlightenment philosopher that exists. It's their fault. Basically, bottom line up front, he argues that the right in its the right of the small L liberalism, aka originally the Whigs and the Federalists and now modern day Republicans, they elevate the individual at the expense of the community and the family, right? Achievement. Go out, be your own man, go do your own thing. Women in the workplace, go do everything. Go, like have a huge career. Well, that's totally fine. And the Democrats support that as well. But what that does fracture is like kind of the millennia old like communities that existed, right? And so what he says is that the economic conditions, particularly like an ultra-free, laissez-faire type market system, create these conditions in which communities are fractured and they're gone, but humans still have a need because we are social beings. And then the next election cycle, the left comes in and government fills the gap. So it's this self-perpetuating kind of seesaw where the right fractures institutions, organic institutions, and the left fills them with government ones. And that's why we have the massive bureaucracy that exists today.
Yeah. It's a hard to argue point. My final book is 12 Pillars by Jim Rohn. So if you've been listening to us this whole time and saying to yourself, I don't really read a lot of books, I'm not much of a reader, maybe if it had pictures or maybe if it was less than 40 pages, if that's you should read 12 Pillars by Jim Rohn, because I'm pretty sure it's like 45 pages with really big text.
That's just insulting people.
We have those listeners, like a lot of them. No, but in all seriousness, it's a short read, but it's a really, really good story. For those of you that don't know who Jim Rohn is, think of like Tony Robinson before Tony Robinson. That's Jim Rohn, Zig Ziglar, those guys. So the book 12 Pillars is kind of just this fictitious kind of moral tale, teaching, however, whatever you want to call it. I'm definitely not finding the word that I want to use here. Yes, it's basically like a long parable. But basically, this guy, his car breaks down and he's outside this big house with this fence, and this mechanic comes out and he starts talking to the mechanic, this old mechanic, and he's really wise and kind of becomes his mentor. And then he keeps going back to the house to help this mechanic work on cars and learn life lessons from him. And the 12 pillars are kind of like those lessons. And it's a really, really good story. And it's filled with a lot of wisdom. So 12 Pillars, super easy read. If you're not a huge reader, start with this one on this list, and if you like it, move on to Russian history or something.
Well, reading is a
advanced
habit, just like anything, just like going to the gym, just like eating healthy. Reading, essentially the feeding of the mind, is a habit that you have to build. And if you are not a big reader, that's fine. Not everybody can bench 405, and not everybody is sitting at 10% body fat and, eating a fully balanced diet all the time. All these things are small habits that you can make, small adjustments at a time. Even if it's like, hey, like when you go to the bathroom, maybe don't bring your phone and have your book sitting right there, and you read 5 pages when you go to the bathroom. And that's your reading for the day.
I hope you're not on the toilet that long. If you are, let me know. I'll help you out with some gut health stuff. But
you know what I mean, though. But like put it in a place where it's like you like give yourself opportunities to read, and like
there's so many easy ways to do it.
Just do like 5 pages a day, and then maybe you get into the habit. And just like, maybe you are going to the gym and you're just doing compound movements, and you're going for a long walk once a week, and you're going to the gym twice a week. And then you add a third week after a couple months. It's all progressive overload. It's all cumulative. It's 1% better every day, right? And then we're 365% better at the end of the year.
And there's a bunch of different ways that you can build that reading habit, whether it's setting your alarm 15 minutes earlier in the morning and reading while you drink a cup of coffee before you start getting ready for the day. That's an easy thing to do that just kind of builds into your routine. You can read in bed before night so that you're not on your phone in bed.
That's good for blue light exposure. Will help you sleep better at night.
Yep. It'll help you sleep better.
Unless you get really inspired by the book and then you want to go off and have like adventures.
Or if you just stay up all night reading. I've made that mistake before. You can have some toilet reading time, as Sean suggested.
It's an option.
If you take any kind of public transit, you can throw a book in your backpack, and instead of doom scrolling on Instagram while you're on the bus or the subway or the metro, you can read for those 15, 20 minutes or however long it takes. You can read on your lunch break instead of setting your fantasy lineup or scrolling through Instagram. So there's so many different ways where you can just add that reading of 5 to 10 minutes into your day, and start with something small. Start with 12 pillars and move on from there.
Bottom line up front, start reading today. Thank you everybody for listening in. Looking forward to hopefully posting more of this content. Have a great night.
Thanks for joining us today at Weights and Wealth, and don't forget to apply today's lessons to live healthy and wealthy.
If this conversation will contribute to your fitness and financial gains, please share it with a friend or family member and give a 5-star review so more people can lift bigger weights and get bigger bank accounts.